Verse 1, chapter 11, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there, and they said one to another, "Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar, and they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have one language. And this they begin to do. Now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. That's the first 9 verses, known as the Babel account, or the confusion, or the Tower of Babel, the scattering of the people and the languages, which we actually learn a little bit about from chapter 10. We regularly refer to this in chapter 11. It's the chapter that talks about it. But actually from chapter 10, of course, we can see that this has occurred. Because regularly we'll find in chapter 10 that the people or the nations were scattered or divided by the people groups, by the nations, you can see the paternal ancestry there. You can see them divided there by the sons, and they went to different lands. But they're also divided by languages or tongues, we know. And we find that in verse 5 of chapter 10. The isles of Gentiles dividing their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families and their nations. And talks about all the sons down through there. And you can probably trace your lineage to one of them if you want to be studious and find that out. If you're of any European descent, you're likely from the son of Japheth. Though it breaks down after that, and to his sons as well. The language event is a huge event that we still see the effects of today, and that's why we have so many languages, and that's why there's almost 7,000 of them, because they continually break down, and they split off and form other languages as well. That's just that's the whole system there of decay that you can see alive and well within our world. Things aren't getting better, like evolution. Things are getting worse, like sin and corruption and things of that sort. Things are not getting better. People are decaying, and things are splitting apart, and we see that more and more. Now, I think actually we mentioned last week that as we go toward a fulfillment of the end of time, we'll actually see a return to this event. That people will begin to come towards one language. English, maybe. I don't know. Not making predictions here. I usually try not to do that. But English is a pretty powerful language in the world right now. But we do know that there will be a leader who has the whole world under his reign. Chapter 13 of Revelation tells us that. It would seem to think that he will have a language there. There will be others involved, of course, but I think he'll be using one primarily, and I don't know how many people can speak English in one form or another, but it's measured with a B in billion, I know. Not as their mother language, but they can speak it through business and things of that sort. If you don't have that, then languages break down and they decay. English is actually we'll hear people talk about how English has changed if you try and read English from the 1300s. What is that one? Chaucer? Is that it? Canterbury Tales and things of that. You try and read that, and then didn't you graduate from high school? You don't know. At least I have an excuse. I'm like twice your age, so I can forget that stuff. You try and read that stuff from 1300, then you try and read something like an email that Caleb Byler sent, and they'll be very, very different. Very hard to decode those two things as the same thing, but they're both English. They've changed some. Yeah, that's true, they've changed, but actually English has been pretty stagnated and standard throughout those years. I mean, it's very odd for a language to go that long and not change. You'll see languages change. Look at Bible translation, and look at foreign Bible translation is a good one to look at. They'll do translations in languages like Spanish or French or whatever it might happen to be, and they may have done them in the 1880s or the 1890s. And 50 to 60 years later, in these countries in South America or Central America or something to that effect, or in some tribal places in Africa, that will have changed so much, you can't understand it at all. I mean, not like, that word's a little bit archaic, and I don't like it, so I think we should get about 100 people together to make a new translation, and then we'll sell it for lots of money. Not that type of change. One or two words are not how I like them, but you can't make heads or tails of it. Compare that to us, and you have no trouble reading translations that are a couple hundred years old, 200 years old easily. Not a problem. So that's something that we see there breaking down, and it goes back to this event. The evolutionary timeline has to make us think that people evolved all over in different places with the ability to speak all these different languages, and it's kind of just unique how some of them match up really close. And but if we go with the Tower of Babel and we see that originally there was one language, and then they split off from that, and we talked about language groups. There's around 100 language groups within linguistic study, different language groups. And if we look at chapter 10 of Genesis, we find around 80 people there who are listed, which could be language groups. There's at least 78 and as many as 94. And you have around 100 linguistic families. That matches up pretty good with the evidence we find and what the Bible tells us. Whereas the evolutionary timeline would never go for one language and things of that sort. But that's what we find. Verse 3, they're making brick. It's thought that they were probably making brick because they didn't have any stones, because you would rather have stone. But they were making brick. Perhaps they're out in the desert there like it is now. You would think that the vegetation was a little bit better than it is today, but it was a very different world than they grew up before the flood for the sons of Noah anyway, and so we don't know. But they were making brick, which were they make. And we talked a little bit about this last week. Slime or tar, do you say? You dare say. Slime, tar. Then we looked up bitumen? I don't know how to pronounce that word. What? Bitumen. Yeah, it sounds great. If it's wrong, you did it. Bitumen, which actually, is there a difference between bitumen, which is what this believed to be, and tar? Anyone?
I don't know, would it be like asphalt?
Well, that's another, I don't know if it's Latin or Greek, but it's like bitumus and alphatus are used really close together. The difference is bitumen is from, it's sediment or sludge basically from crude oil, and tar is from coal. So with that, I ask you, which one was more likely in the Mesopotamian area? Seeing what we see today, it was probably crude oil. But anyway, it's some sort of black substance, we think, no doubt, that was used to hold this together, because they didn't have their mortar to hold everything together, so they used this slimy, tarry, bitumus, if you want to be precise about the material there. But that's what they were using there, and to build this tower. They're building a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Verse 4. So they were concerned about making themselves a name. And we know from Genesis chapter 6, there were men of renown. Were they trying to make themselves a name too? I would assume so, that people like that to do that today. We like, if you run a business, you sort of have to make a name for yourself, or have people do it for you. You have to, hey, yeah, he's really good at, finishing wood, or cutting down trees, or, he's the best, whatever it might happen to be that you can think of, But we do that, and there's nothing wrong with that in trying to do your job effectively and well. But these people were doing something that was wrong because they were disobeying a command of God. Because God told them to go fill the earth, go fill it up. And they were saying, oh, let's stay right here in one spot. And, regardless of what God said, we really don't care. But let us be certain that we make a name for ourselves. And we can get caught in that trap as well. We can be more concerned with making a name for ourselves or making certain that people think highly of us than we can of what God has told you to do. Maybe God has told you to be a lowly peon. In all likelihood, he probably has. There are a few people that rise up above that are well known and have a name, and so to say. But certain to focus upon what God has called us to do first and foremost, and they were doing that. Or they were actually not doing that. They were focusing upon themselves. But they're building a city and a tower, the top reaching unto heaven. What was the Tower of Babel? We really don't know. We can speculate till our ears turn green if we want. But many people think that they were what's called ziggurats. There are lots of these in the Mesopotamian area, Ethiopia, Egypt, and all sorts around in there. And they were thought to be used for worship of the gods. Corruption already. Here's a couple of them that they have named that we have found today. The Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. The Seven Decrees of Heaven and Earth. Temple of the Mystery. Temple of the Stairway to Pure Heaven. Temple of the God. Temple of the Exalted Dwelling Place. The Exalted Mountain. Foundation of Heaven and Earth. That which links heaven and earth. All these were names they gave to these temples and these ziggurats, which actually sort of seems to line up pretty close with what we think about this one. But they were making themselves gods, really, or perhaps corrupting the worship of God into something else. We know in Romans 1, and we see around us, people are notorious for worshiping the creation and not the creator. Were they doing that with the signs in the heavens, the stars, the things of that sort? Possible. We don't know, but we know they were disobeying God. That's the one thing we can really learn from in this passage here, I think, is don't disobey God, if we needed this passage to know that. But we know that in a number of other places. But we also get our answers in regards to why are there so many languages today? Why is that? We don't have to walk around saying, well, I really don't have a clue what's going on. You might walk around saying that, but it's not because the Bible doesn't notify us of exactly what's going on. It does tell us what's going on. They are concerned about being scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth, the exact thing that God told them to do. Be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. The Lord comes down, he sees the tower as children of men build. And the Lord said, behold, the people are one. They have one language, and this begin to do. Nothing will be restrained from them. They'll be able to do anything they want. We must stop them. So he confounds their language, and they do not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scatters them abroad from the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. So he stopped them. God gives a very mild judgment. A very mild judgment. I mean, he could have just wiped everybody out if he'd have wanted to, because they were disobeying. He can do that. He's God. We're not. But much of what we find today matches up closely with what we're seeing here. These ziggurats, these towers to heaven, the worship here, it's a corruption of the true worship. Anytime we go back and look at the cultures of old, we find similarities with the biblical account, but also a corruption of what was really true. And people refuse to worship the true God. Why? Well, because they don't want to, because they love darkness, because they love evil, because they love to sin. And we've all been in that boat at some point. Hopefully we're not in that boat right now, because that's the road that leads to ultimate separation from God. But that, it's not, well, gee, why were they doing this? Why do people sin today? No, because it's pleasing to the flesh, and they like to do it, and that's just what I want to do, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. Certainly not if I'm an American. You're not going to tell me what to do, and that's with most people. This is just what I want to do. So this we find here. Also, the other thing we get out languages out of here, and we get races, so-called, out of here. What would happen? Well, the people would go to different lands. We talked about Olmec. Well, that was the people that preceded the Mayans, I believe. And it's like, how did they get to where they got? Because they no doubt came from Africa, but how did they get over there? And, they claimed, their ancient history claimed that they came on a boat. And that might seem a little far-fetched for us, the fact that these cave people, is how we usually seem to equate them, because they're not nearly as educated as I am. These cave people could be able to build a boat to traverse the Atlantic Ocean, and perhaps even more than that. And how could they possibly do that? Because, they're just cave people. But we must remember, at this time, it is believed that, not that this has to be the case for it to be true, but at this time Noah's probably alive at the Tower of Babel. In fact, everybody's alive at this point. At this point, it's likely that nobody has died. Noah's probably alive. He was a fairly effective shipbuilder. He was pretty effective at it. So it's likely that people would have this knowledge. It would have been passed down to them, and they would be able to build these ships that would be able to do exactly that. Another one, and this is sometime after that, this is a couple thousand years ago, the ancient inhabitants of Easter Island traveled at least 2,000 miles by sea with necessary crops and supplies to begin a civilization. It thrived for 1,000 years. They were able to build and erect 200 enormous statues which weighed between 15 and 182 tons. The tallest statue was 33 feet tall, 75 tons. No one knows how they built, moved, or erected these statues. They did not even attempt to move the 80-ton replica. But they know these people flourished. They know these people did this and went 2,000 miles by boat. It's highly likely they did that before that as well. And also that leads us into all these people being alive. Who's the first person after the flood to die? Anybody got it? Nobody? Now you might be able to prove me wrong. Because I read this or watched this, I think it was on an AIG Tower of Babel movie. But it said the first person to die after the flood was Peleg, which would have been 300 plus years after the flood. Because he was born at least 100 years after the flood, and he lived to be about 240 or something to that effect. Which means he died before Noah. Now, that's hard to believe, isn't it? But that tells a lot of cultures or tribal people today, even still, will have ancestor worship. And it's sort of like, why in the world do they do that? It's just impossible for me to believe that somebody would be worshiping my grandfather. I mean, he's dead. Big deal. I mean, yeah, he's an old man, he died, But consider how this might have led into that. If all the younger ones are dying and living to 150 to 180 years old, meanwhile you've got this other person who's 800 years old that just keeps living and living and living. Now, there weren't very many of them after the flood, obviously, Noah, and that's about it. Shem lived to about 600, I think. But that would lead into ancestor worship. You know, this guy's amazing. He's never going to die. He's like a god. And they would probably, some of them would proclaim themselves as such. It's believed that that was true of the Olmecs as well. Their leader who brought them there, whose name fails me, and if I could remember it, I couldn't pronounce it right, and you couldn't remember it right, so you can just go Google it if you want. But it's believed that he lived an extremely long period of time after he brought them there, and which leads into ancestor worship. Ancestor worship. And again, you know, why would we find that? You know, do these people just, you know, why would this happen? I think the Bible has the answer. Okay, races is another one. Racism has been a huge problem, well, probably throughout all history. Definitely, we can attest to that in our own country since the 1770s and before that. But we know they could have fixed a lot of things then, and they didn't, and then they had to wait till later to fix it and shed a lot more blood, and still we see problems because of that. Because laws don't fix that. People's hearts fix that, and the Spirit of God fixes that, which is ultimately what we need to turn to, not a man-made law. Not that there should be laws supporting slavery or racism of the sort, but and in fact, Descent of Man, Darwin, will actually lead us into racism, saying those who have black skin are less evolved than those who have white skin, to summarize it in a nutshell. But this tells us why people have different, you know, they look different, they, you know, well, why do they look like they do? Why do those people have dark skin and those people have light skin and those people have slanted eyes and those people don't? Well, because they each went to a different location, and those genes or such came to the top, that they rose to the top. Caleb Byler asked a question about, we were talking about how people would separate into villages or into tribes. You know, the reason we have so many languages, people would split off and go into their own tribe, and they would just stay there in their own tribe. That's where they would stay. It's as if people in Merrill would stay in Merrill, and they would never leave Merrill. If you were in Merrill, why would you ever have a reason to leave Merrill? I can't possibly think of one. You know, if you were in Breckenridge, you stayed there, and it even got smaller. If you were in Porter, you stayed there, and you know, and that caused a lot of languages as people grew up. And we were asking, well, what about, you know, there's such a small pool to intermarry there with, and you know, well, that's true. But we also need to understand, at the Tower of Babel, when this occurred, you could still intermarry as freely as you wanted. There's, you know, not too many restrictions are placed here. You know, we don't have the forbidding of marrying close relatives until Leviticus, which is, about 600 years, maybe 700 years, maybe more than that after this event right here. So we obviously the genetic makeup is okay up to that point. I mean, we can really see that rise to the front now. But obviously there was enough mixing to prevent, you know, the immediate wiping out of people. But that's exactly what we do see today with the small tribes in Papua New Guinea and other places as well. You know, they're dying out. You know, there's 7,000 languages, but over 1,000 of them at least are dying because there's nobody that speaks them anymore. Because there's not that many people in those little tribes anymore. And so, you know, that's something to think about. Of course, chromosomes and DNA, let's see, a woman has what? 2 X's, right? Is that right? Are you sure? All right. And a man has an X and a Y. If you asked me that yesterday, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But I just don't study that stuff that much. But it is interesting. They say you find the evidence they're finding right now actually lines up perfectly with this account. You know, the woman gets her woman DNA from her mom, down. So how many lines of female DNA would you expect to find if you believe the Bible from the very first verse? And Noah and his wife had no more children after the flood. How many women were on the ark? 4. So if Noah's wife didn't have any more children, that's how many women left? 3. So how many lines would that? And that's exactly what they're finding right now. How many male would you expect? Well, you expect to find 1 because they're all from the same man. And that's pretty much what they find right now. Now, obviously, it's a lot more complex than that, and I'm certainly not an expert on it, but I can listen to people that are. So again, it lines up with the Bible. Racism is not, people have used the Bible to promote that. People have used the Bible for everything. That doesn't make it right. The Bible actually contains the answers that tell us that out of one blood came everybody. And that's in Acts 17, and it tells us that right there. We don't have to think that, these people are black because they're the ones that are cursed. They're Canaanites, and they're the ones that are cursed, and they're the ones that are slaves because they did bad things, so that's what they deserve, and I'm not going to try and get them out of that either. So just deal with it. Regardless of what you want to do to try and get them out of it, that's just a bunch of nonsense. Because the people from Canaan, there are dark-skinned people from each of the 3 sons of Noah, and from several other people as well after that. So the idea that, that's just the way it is because of that is not true. It does horrible damage to the text. And then when we try and actually promote a position that is biblical and is true, people will say, that's a bunch of hooey nonsense that I'm not going to listen to because you just promoted a bunch of nonsense right before that, if you would publish that position. Which people have, but we don't want to. People have been slaves all down throughout history. Every sort of people has done it to every sort of people. That's not the issue there. The issue is, where did the races come from? Right here has the answer for us. As they moved out to their different places or positions of geographic location, this is exactly what we find here. They're scattered abroad. Anybody got any comments, questions, preferably comments? Because I've said everything I know.
I wonder how well that word for slime lines up with the pitch that they used on the ark.
On the ark, let's see. I got something somewhere. There is a difference. I'm pretty sure, because in Exodus 2:3, which is Moses' ark, which was much smaller, we're presuming. But it says, when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime, the same word that we had before, and with pitch. So there's a difference there. Other than what it is, I don't know, but there is a difference there. The other place we might find this slime or tar or asphaltus. Genesis 14:10, the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. So there were these pits all over the place. But yeah, I think there is a difference between, I don't know, you've just brought up something interesting. Because when I search for the pitch that we find in Exodus 2:3, I don't find it in Genesis 6. I think they're different. And I think that the slime, this bitumen or asphaltus or bitumus, did we say? Or whatever. I think that was created by the flood, as we have huge amounts of destruction of vegetation. That's what. How do we make oil? Well, we have to have it, the vegetation and things compressed for millions and billions and billions of years, and then after a while you'll have some oil or you'll have some coal. Well, I believe all of that except for the chronological period. I think that you got to have vegetation, you got to compress it, got to be heat, got to be pressure, got to be that. But it's a very short period of time. And so I think that came about because of the flood. Not to say that there couldn't have been any before the flood. Anyone else got anything to add?
So do you think that as the world becomes more unified once again, that's going to create the same arrogancy against God?
Well, I think you're going to see the same arrogancy. I don't know. That's a very good question. Do you think as the world becomes more unified in that sense, that you'll see the same arrogancy towards God? I think you're going to see the same arrogancy. I think it may be worse. I think they'll be fighting against God. At least these people, when they get judged, they go. We're going this way and we're going that way, and I think at the end of time, you don't even see that. You see God bringing judgments, and you see God allowing things to happen, and then the people just keep on marching. No repentance nowhere there in that last period there. But I think you'll see the same arrogancy there. But whether or not we can connect them to, language and that sort, I don't know. But I think it'll be the same. I think, and like I said, I think it might be a little bit worse in a sense. But on another sense, I think, these people were just coming together. They weren't. When we get to the end time, I think people are doing that, and they're lining up an anti-God system because, there are going to be some very difficult times there that are described, and, one of those is people are going to be hungry. And, when you get hungry, you do things you wouldn't normally do, maybe. So I think for a period of time anyway, it won't be necessarily arrogancy against God, but I don't feel like I got a choice, that this is what I have to do. Now, I think there will be a choice. And I think part of the problem that will lead to people thinking they don't have a choice is the lifestyle they've lived. In the sense that most everybody in here is used to eating when food's ready, it's time to eat. We're not lacking. I know I might look like it, but I'm not lacking for food. So you can survive with less than an American survives on. But we're so comfortable and we're so committed to what we want. I've said, good food, I think, will be a temptation for people of Western culture to submit to the Antichrist. Good food. Now, if you don't like food that well, you might think, that's a bunch of nonsense. I tell you, there are people who like good food, and they'll do anything to get it. There are people who are absolutely addicted to the stuff. Air conditioning. I know people that can't function. They can't function. I'm not talking oh man, it's hot. I can't believe this. No, if it's not there, I'm not doing it. That could be a temptation for people. You could go on and on and on with things there. But, a lot of that comes back to you got to settle things now. You got to settle things now about what you're going to do and looking about what might happen and decide if I'm going to do this or that. Decide if I'm going to stay how I think God wants me to or not. That's a huge thing, settling it right now. All I can tell you is the pitch is a different word in Genesis 6 to Exodus 2. The remaining portion of Genesis 11 is basically genealogies. Talking about Shem. How many people were alive at the Tower of Babel? The evolutionary story says there were about 10,000 people that went out of Africa. That's pretty close to the Tower of Babel, by the way. But there were about 10,000 people out of there. In fact, they put it, if they're truthful, at Mesopotamia, which is pretty close to that. About 10,000 people went this way and that way and every which way. I don't know, how many years ago was that? 100,000 years ago? That's when they did that. I don't think it was 100,000 years ago, but I think there were close to 10,000 people there. Probably less, but could be more. Okay, you got Shem, and his brothers had, I think, 16 children. You can safely assume they had that many sons. You can safely assume they had that many daughters. Probably more. There's usually more females born than males, as I can readily attest to. So there's at least 30, 35, and you do that for each generation until you get to Peleg. And I think that's when it happened. Peleg was born 100 years after this, but I think you've already got the possibility there for at least 4,000 people. It's not a problem. You go to... You've got Shem, he has Arphaxad, his son, and he has Selah, so that's the third generation. And then you go, Selah has Eber, and Eber, which is the beginning of the Hebrews, and most likely there, the beginning of the Hebrews, I suppose, is Adam. But Eber, and then Eber lived 430 years and begat Peleg. And he lived after that 430 years and begat sons and daughters. He's begetting a lot of children. This is conservative estimates that, so basically the three sons of Noah had times 5 sons, 15, times 5 daughters, 30. And then you do that for 5 generations, and eventually you get out to about the 5th generation, you're up to 3,700, but then you have to add all those others together, so you're actually close to 5,000 because nobody's died yet. Because the first person to die is probably Peleg, and he just got born in that. A lot of people think that the split happened, the Tower of Babel happened about 5 years after Peleg was born. It could have been, it definitely happened after he was born, most likely. That's how I would interpret the earth was divided. You can go with a geological division there if you desire. I think the context fits linguistic division better. Linguistic division better. So sometime between he was born, between when he had a child, which was 30 years old. So sometime between 100 years after the flood and 130. Somewhere in there is probably the Tower of Babel. Most likely, if we are to believe the record that we have here. So about 4,000 to 5,000 people, maybe more. You could easily get up to 10,000, and it's not a problem to do that. These 3 sons of Noah that only had 15 children, that's actually pretty low in number for what a lot of these people were believed to have done. I mean, it's not uncommon for people today for 3 siblings to have that many children. It's not every family that does it, certainly, but it's not uncommon. Certainly can be done. But remember, everybody's alive, nobody dies. Why did people start dying? Well, I guess why did they start dying sooner? Younger lives. All I can tell you is I don't know. Other than that, I don't know. Some have suggested a multitude of things. So they've suggested the atmosphere changed, which is possible. The atmosphere changed. It's very possible the atmosphere changed. That could explain a lot of things. They began to eat meat instead, and where they were just eating vegetables. Well, you can sort of say that, but vegetarians today don't live to be 850 years old. it's likely that the vegetables were a little bit different previous to that, which also plays into the environment. So, atmosphere, environment different. They ate meat. I don't think it was necessarily eating meat. I don't think you should eat, 30 pounds of it a day or anything. But, was that it? Was it, mutations increase? That's very possible. Very possible that those increased. I think I think actually the answer is all those things I've suggested, and when I ask you which one, you just say yes, because I think they all played a part. I think the mutation, genetic mutations messing up and falling apart bodies, and also the atmosphere, the environment changed, the food changed, all of that playing together, I think, shortened the lives. I don't think we can just point to just one thing. If we did, we would just have to point to genetic mutations to the one thing. Though I think an argument can be made that all of those are together. But what we find there, it's not just one. It's not just the atmosphere. Or why did Noah live so long? He still lived 350 years after the flood. Why did Shem live so long? Abraham is born before Noah dies. So, I think all those things play together. But we'll go ahead and stop there before we get into Abraham. And, we'll go ahead and stop there. Leading up to Abraham here, and they're going to Canaan, though for some reason they stopped. So we have a tendency to do that too. When we're going somewhere for God, then we stop. But God can still work there. Well, let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for this day, for this time together. We thank you for your word that you have left here. We thank you for the answers that it gives to us. We praise your name for the good things that you have done for us and the record that you have left us. Help us to learn from what we have learned here this evening, from what your word teaches us. Help us to learn from that and to walk in that and to proclaim that and to learn to give this news to those that we meet and those we come in contact with, and be able to proclaim your goodness and your good things and your message and how your story explains everything. Pray that you would be with us as we go from here, that you would give us safety, that you would give us protection, that you would give us guidance. We ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. You're dismissed.